Go for it.
Hey, everybody, welcome back to the Mosaic Podcast. I've been doing so many different things lately that I've almost let this podcast slide a little bit because I've been enamored by another project that I'm doing, which started out as 50 conversations with 50 strangers. I wanted to see what would happen when two people came into a room that didn't know each other at all and just had a conversation, what that looked like, how that would be. And it's been fascinating. Some of them have been really fascinating. Some of them have been very boring. Some of them have been funny. Some of them have been touching. Um, and it's caught me up in a about 3 weeks period of time. I've had over 75 conversations that are recorded, and I'm probably going to continue to do it into the thousands, and if I live long enough, into the millions, because I'm finding something so rich is happening when you invite people into a room with no agenda, with no desire to make them anything other than to listen to what they have to say, and to just go with that. So I've sort of the Mosaic podcast, because I've had so many conversations in 50 conversations, has sort of slid to the back. But I love that today that is changing, because there is a man sitting before you. His name is Alfred Alcorn. We call him, he goes by the name of Alfie. And Alfie has done something a while back that in other realms, in other worlds, in other places, people might attribute some powers to him as having some sort of ability to predict the future. Let me tell you a little bit about this man, and then we'll jump into what's going on. He was first published in 2013. I'm sorry, he wasn't first published. Sugar Mountain was first published in 2013. And it reveals the story. It's a struggle of an extended family trying to survive a pandemic that starts in China and spreads around the world with a devastating effect. Does that sound at all familiar? As it stands, Sugar Mountain could serve as a survival manual should COVID-19 mutate and turn more deadly than it already is. Because of the relevance and increased demand for Sugar Mountain, the publisher has come out with a reissue that might be of interest to those who have not read the 2013 edition. Alfie was born Alfred Denny and orphaned at the age of 8. He grew up in the UK, in Ireland, and in the US. He graduated from Harvard. And worked as a journalist, editor, teacher, travel director for the Harvard Museum of Natural History. In that last capacity, he planned and led trips all over the world, including Antarctica. He has been a safari guide, mostly in Tanzania, which he knows well. To date, he's written and published 10 novels. They have been reviewed in the New Yorker, the New York Times, the Boston Globe, and many other publications. No small feat, by the way. Being an author myself, to get anything reviewed in the New York Times, huge. It is with my honor and my privilege to welcome to the Mosaic Podcast, Alfred Alcorn. Alfie, welcome to the show. How are you today?
I'm very good, Danny. Thanks for having me on. Appreciate it.
It is my honor. What struck me is almost the prophetic quality of the book Sugar Mountain. Because as you well know, as everybody well knows, we are sitting in a pandemic that has put the world on pause in all across the world. I don't think there's been another moment in history that I've known of, perhaps you are more a historian than I am, where the whole world has stopped for a period of time and isolated itself. And it doesn't seem to be slowing down. The good news about the pandemic, at least now, is that the death rate from it is not quite as high. It's a minimal amount, and it seems to be affecting a certain group of people more than other group of people. But we have no idea what twists and turns are going to go. Where did you get the idea to write this story?
I think it came from several sources. One of them was the SARS outbreak in China back around 2011 or 2009, sometime in around that period. And it just struck me that there was the potential there for a Spanish flu kind of pandemic. And of course, Spanish flu killed more people than died in World War One.
Yes.
So it's it's not without precedent. And then there've been plagues before. You go back to the Bible, and I think that coincided with an interest at that time that wasn't necessarily related. There was a lot of homesteading and survivalists, and the survivalists they went all the way from the far, I won't say the far left, I would say from the sort of the communal types to the militia type. So it was in the air, and I
Yes.
think what happened to me is I sort of put them together and came up with the idea of what would happen in a place I know well, which is Western Massachusetts, should a lethal pandemic start. So
Fascinating.
I think that's where those sort of things come from, at least from me.
And so in January or in September of last year or whatever, when this news started to generate of that is almost word for word what's come from your book, did that surprise you?
Actually, it did. I was watching it, and I thought to myself, "Oh, you predicted this." It's the problem is it's like I go back to Kenneth Galbraith warned John Kennedy about getting into Vietnam, and he said afterwards, I, "I hated to be right." Uh,
Yes.
and sometimes you end up in this position where you've predicted something, uh, but I didn't want to take a lot of satisfaction in it.
Yeah, of
You can
course.
put it that way. I'd much rather be a nonprofit and not have had COVID-19.
Yeah, I think all of us would.
Put it that way.
But still, when you have, it's so interesting because I know that a lot of companies have hired science fiction writers to come on
Right.
staff to predict trends of where the world will go and to try and bring them into the world that they wrote about. Um, do you see that a lot in writing, that writers often are the forebearers of something that is coming in the future?
Very possibly. That might be a result of that. Today, there are just so many writers writing
Yeah.
about so many things. Hit and miss. Somebody's going to hit it right, whether it's space travel or the decline of the West or the rise of the West or whatever. Partly, I think that, and but I think sometimes writers do have a sixth sense about what's coming down the line because they sit around, a lot of fiction writers especially, I think, sit around thinking about what's going on, whereas I've been a journalist, and when you're a journalist, it's the fire down the street, it's uh, the governor you have to interview. You don't, your mind doesn't get a chance to freewheel, so to speak.
Yeah.
And I think that may be part of it.
Although in today's time, right now, we're living through the fake news, bonanza that is at least broadcast all over the place. It makes the public question what the journalist is really reporting. What are your thoughts on the way news and fake news and all
I
that is
I
happening
I,
now?
I, oh, I think so. I think you have, as I think I said before, you have a lot more news and not much information sometimes.
Yes.
I get that feeling, but also I remember back in the day when I was a journalist, uh, in every small town in Massachusetts and pretty much across the country, there were what were called stringers. And it was a whole web that started, for instance, the New York Times had a stringer in Montgomery, Alabama named Ray Jenkins, who was a Neiman fellow. But he had stringers all over South Alabama.
What is a
And I
stringer? What is a
think
stringer?
a stringer is somebody, let's say, in the town of Belmont, where I live, or the town of Coleraine out west, where the Globe might say to me, Alfie, if something really good happens in town or bad happens in town, then there's a little story on it. And that used to be all woven in. I think that broke up. And I think that's why that election, for instance, was a surprise to people. There were only a few people out there with their eyes and ears on the ground. You had an awful lot of media, and think about it. They missed the biggest story of 21st century.
Yeah, it's huge.
Huge, and they missed it. And yet, when you look at them, when you see the panels and you see the equipment, and John King pulling up little counties and saying, "This went this way in 2012," and on, and more information and less news. Put it that way,
Yeah, that's a great saying. More information.
Anyway, that was my read on it.
Yeah. Let's go back a little bit, if you don't mind, and try and understand you, the person, if we can, a little bit. Normally, my first question is, what did your parents do? But you lost your parents early on. What was that? What was that like for you, and how did that happen?
Oh, I for me, it wasn't that bad. I keep thinking it was for them that it was tragic. My dad went through World War II. He demobbed around 1946. I remember him very well. He was around for about a year, and then he got leukemia. It might have been war-related. I don't know. He's exposed to pretty horrific stuff. He died. Then my mother, who was from Ireland, had tuberculosis this whole time.
Wow.
And before she died, she put us on my brother and I on a boat to live with our grandfather.
And where was your grandfather living?
He was living in a place called County Roscommon. He was a farmer, and he was old at the time, but my aunt and uncle were there, and they took care of us for a year, a beautiful year. And then I had an aunt who had emigrated to America and married a farmer called Alcorn. So I ended up growing up on a dairy farm in South Chelmsford, Massachusetts. Just one big adventure.
Wow. So how did
And again, I wasn't. Go ahead.
No, you go ahead. Then again, what?
Oh no, I was just going to say about my original parents, Alfred Denny and Anna Cecilia Denny. I mean, they were the tragic figures, not me or my brother. We survived. We've done well. We're not tragic figures. They are.
Yeah. But as a boy, losing your parents, did you not feel affected by that? Did it just move from, well, my parents aren't here, to now I'm going to go with my grandparents or my aunt?
It wasn't like living at home we had about, I don't know, 6 months of real family life. And then because both my parents were sick, my brother and I went to an orphanage. And there's a lot of orphanages at the time because of the casualties of the war. So we're in and out of orphanages, back into Merseyside, the place 51 Lambkin Lane in Wallasey, near Liverpool. So it was fractured anyway, and it's more more as you get older that it hits you.
Yes.
Not then. You know, it's, and again, it's the pathos of it.
Yeah.
And yeah. Anyway,
But I have to say,
kids.
I lost my parents 2 years apart on the same day when I was 13 and when I was 15. And
Yeah.
we had a different life than you had. We grew up poor, but we grew up very happy. And we sat around the
Right.
dining room table and laughed, and we had, I mean, we were, my mom was the quintessential mom, where we would come home from school and there was milk and cookies on the table. You know, she would always
Right.
prepare the meals, and my dad would come home from work and would just sit down and have his Bloody Mary before we started dinner. You know, and it was just
Nice.
like the normal tradition of what would happen. But I know their passing totally changed the trajectory of my life, because
Sure. It would.
and what I realized is, in writing my book, The Mosaic, it's a story about a boy who loses his parents 2 years apart on the same day. And when he asks the adults where his parents are, they tell him they're in a place called heaven. So my search in my
Right.
entire life has been that place called heaven, which has led me away from doing amazing things. Like, I was offered the chance to run $1 billion company, but it wasn't the heaven that I was
Right.
looking for. So what I'm
Right.
wondering
Right.
is, did any of that happen to you, or did you just tuck it away in a place where, or was there no need to tuck it away because you didn't really know them that much?
It was always with me, but it's only in my later years that it came to the fore. But I think, uh, in some ways, consciously, I said they were deprived of a good life. The hell with it. I'm going to have a good life. And
Wow.
I have. I've been,
Yeah.
you know, still, my wife and I are married, still married 55 years. I have two beautiful daughters. I have grandchildren. Um, my life has been rich beyond belief. I've had my revenge
Yeah.
for my
I,
parents.
what I
So
want
that's
to
one
know,
way of looking at it.
no, well, it's a great way of looking at it, because, um, hold on one second. It's a great way of looking at it, because what a beautiful way to say, I'm not going to be caught by the reality of what's happened to me. I'm going to create my reality by just moving on with my life. But how does a kid whose parents have illness like that, who pass away at an early age, who grows up in an orphanage, how does that kid find his way to Harvard and do the things that you did? Can you explain that to me?
I luck.
It's got to be
Uh,
more than luck.
a lot of it's just plain. Well, it may be more than luck, but it's a combination of luck and, um, uh, just staying open to the world. What do you want to do? I want to see the world. I gave up a very good job to become a secretary to the person running the travel program at the Harvard Museum of Natural History. I took a huge salary cut, and I was a secretary. And I just said I get 2 trips a year, and then I took over the program, and I probably did about uh, upwards of 90 natural history trips over a,
Wow.
I don't know, 10-year period, something
Wow.
like that. A lot,
So,
anyway.
so to people, this is really what's interesting to me. And I don't want to leave your book behind, but I want to just do this background, and then I want to get back to Sugar Mountain. To people who have a lot less tragedy in their life than you had experienced, but are stuck in that tragedy, and that tragedy defines their life, what would you say to them from your experience?
I would say that don't think about yourself too much.
Yeah.
It made me think about others, but there's one thing I learned early on is that the self-regard, self-absorption, self-pity is a dead-end street. And you got you just got to get out of it. The world goes on. And if it's not that you don't care about yourself. What was that old Hebrew saying? If you don't love yourself, who will? But if you only love yourself, what are you?
Yes.
So uh, I think it's that. And sometimes it's just being ah, hungry for life too. You know, want to get out there. I want to see it. Um, and but I don't want to do it like everybody else. Though I'm pretty much like a lot of people. So you know, it's you know, I don't know. I don't have any easy answers. I don't think.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting
You just
because when you mosaic the conversation together, and you go to Sugar
right,
Mountain, and you go to the pandemic that's happening now, and you go to the way you grew up, and you go to don't think about yourself so much. What if you were to put those all on an overhead projector? What would you say to people right now around the pandemic? Because I see a lot of people thinking a lot about themselves. I see a lot of parties, a lot of the world. I see us in silos where the silos are thinking about themselves. I think I see in politics people wanting to get reelected, whatever side they're on, whether it's reelected or elected, thinking about
right.
themselves. And oftentimes, like the simple knowledge of what you just said, I don't want people to lose it because of how sort of simple and profound it actually is, to get out of this self thought and just live life and really live it to its fullest. What would you say to people that are isolated and in isolation because of a pandemic that's not letting them do just that?
Well, well, the first thing it's like when you're on an airliner and the cabin staffer says, "Case of lack of oxygen, put your mask on first, then take care of your kids."
Right.
I'd say to people in the pandemic, put your mask on, take care of yourself, and then and found that then there may be some old lady up the road, not that I'm young, who needs help, or family members, you know, just that, just be commonsensical and it's easy to say sometimes, and it's you know, but I've noticed people around here. I mean, we actually live out in the country a lot, out in Coleraine, Mass, in a very rural area. People call up and said, "Can we, you know, you need groceries, this sort of thing." I think
Beautiful.
those sometimes those are just gestures, but they mean more than they do.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh,
One of the things that I
uh,
wanted to do before
that's
One of the things that I wanted to do before COVID hit, I was just about to leave on a trip around America, and then if I could have done it around the world, to just sit on street corners and in boardrooms, in government offices, in hospitals, in jails, in homeless shelters, and just sit and speak with people. That's why I'm doing the 50 conversations with 50 strangers,
right.
because I think the world that we see on television is a very different world than the world we actually live in. And that the fact that people are bringing people meals in rural areas, the fact that people are helping people out on the streets, that doesn't get televised because maybe it's not quite as good for ratings, except for a little cute story at the end of a news
Right,
cycle,
right.
right? It really depicts a world that's very different than the world that we live in. And so
I think I think what you're doing is absolutely necessary,
thank you.
frankly. When
Thank
you
you.
talk about mosaic, you're talking about there's several different predictions there. One is the Moses, the laws, but one is also the little things that go into making the bigger
Yes.
picture. You need those bits of bigger bits of light, if you will.
Yes.
No, I think that needs, and I'm not talking about the talking down to the man on the street, but every once in a while, I would just love to see not somebody who's involved in just ordinary. You're right, ordinary people. What are you doing? Go down, drive down the suburban street, knock on the door, just say, "Hey, I'm from, you know, I'm Danny.
Yeah.
how's it going here?
Yeah,
That kind of
exactly.
thing.
That's that's what I wanted to do. I was set to leave May 1st. And
Oh,
the
really?
pandemic, I literally was set. I had made up all the excuses to keep me at home. I wanted to get a sponsored vehicle. I wanted to have a hotel sponsored. I wanted to get sponsored meals. I wanted to get, all these things. And I said,
Sure.
screw this. I'm going to just go out there and do whatever I can do. I'll take a train. I'll take a car. I'll drive in an Uber. I'll do whatever I need to do to get in front of people. And then the pandemic came like 2 weeks before I was about to leave and said, you're not going anywhere.
Wow.
Talking about pandemic,
That, but don't give up.
no,
Go ahead.
I'm doing it now virtually through these conversations with strangers. And then I'm also meeting with film people who love the idea of what the voice of the voiceless would say if we would listen to it. And so that's my project. That's really, and whether I'll do that in person or virtually, I want to still do it in person when it's safe to travel again.
Well, I hope that's soon.
Thank you. Me too. Me too. I feel like I should burrow through your book that you sent me a copy of, and find out how soon that's going to be. But let's go back to Sugar Mountain.
Okay.
You talked about the possibility of reading a chapter from it. Would you like to read something from it now?
Well, not so much a chapter, but I could read you the part in the beginning, which in a sense lays out the situation.
I would
And
love
I'll
that.
just paraphrase a little bit into it, because it's set in Western Massachusetts, in an area I know, and it's got a little bit of a buzz out there. A lot of people have read it, and it's But anyway, it starts out basically on a day when the Sars Outbreak is the family patriarch. And some years before he got into the homesteader movement. He wanted to set up a place for his extended family, so if something happened, they could go there and survive. And so the book starts out with a news broadcast. And I'll just go on from there. In his farmhouse in the hill country of Western Massachusetts, Sars Outbreak watches the news about the outbreak and feels his own alarm level ratchet up. It is a foreboding mingled with the sense of vindication that he resists. Could this be it? There have been several flare-ups of lethal flu in China in the recent past, but in those instances, the Chinese government cooperated with international health agencies as to the specifics of the pathogen involved. Now it is clamping down. Why? What are they hiding? Now, you talk about in his early 70s, medium height, stuff like that. He reminded me of you. Slightly stooped. Sars has a full head of white hair and an Amish beard of darker hue, a suitable frame for his slow-smiling patrician face. He notes the name of the province. He muses. Phase 5. He tuned into CNN this warm spring morning to follow a forest fire flaring along in the Grand Canyon. That footage showed a blackened expanse east of Canyon Village, where junipers, pinyon, and ponderosa pines once mantled the south rim. Also news about floods in the Mississippi, etc. His interest in disasters is more than academic. Sars is a prepper, a homesteader, a survivalist. Along with millions of others in America and overseas, he calculates the probability of a catastrophe that's too high to be ignored. General awareness of possibilities came into sharp focus in 2009 when a bird flu scare made the Centers for Disease Control urge people to take precautions. That blew over, but left Cyrus wondering when avian influenza or some other highly mutagenic virus would turn into a mass killer. He didn't have to wait for nature to take its course to make the nightmare scenario more than theoretical. In November of 2011, news broke that a virologist working in the Erasmus Medical Center in the Netherlands had tinkered with the genome of the H5N1 virus and come up with a lethal contagious variant. The research was part of an international effort to understand the virus so that antivirals could be developed to fight it. The new strain caused immediate concern about its possible use as a bioterrorism agent. Little more than a year later, researchers in China's Harbin Veterinary Research Institute combined a deadly avian flu virus with an infectious strain of human flu. Western critics pointed out that the record of containment at such labs was not reassuring. So that, I hope that's enough just to give you a sense of the setting of it. It's not based on hearsay, that things were happening back at that time.
The really interesting thing that I get as you're speaking about it, and I don't know why we don't think about this, because COVID-19 is not the first pandemic that has come across our path, and news talks about other pandemics, but it doesn't take a psychic to predict something like this is going to happen based on past events that have happened, right? And as much as I want to give you psychic capabilities for predicting in 213 or 209 that this is what's going to happen, it really is, if we follow the course of the life that we have been living and the situations that are happening, this is the obvious solution. But what's even more predictive to me, which is even more troubling to me, is that COVID is really just a step en route to another pandemic that could actually be much, much, much more dangerous.
I think that's the crux of the thing. I think if this was just a one-off, and I hope it is, and they get it under control of the vaccine, but the nightmare scenario, and maybe this comes out of almost human genetic pessimism, is that either this can mutate or it'll get siphoned off somewhere else, sit around for 5 years, mutate again, and come back worse. You know, when you've got as much biomass in the world today with human beings,
yes,
every one of us a lab in a sense. I don't know. I think it is something to really watch, and not just think, okay, wow, we're through this. Even COVID-19 is proving pernicious. It hasn't just come and gone.
No.
They're finding different effects. It kids in different ways. Adults, it does more than just the lungs. You know, I think it is a warning sign. You know,
and to those who I'm sorry. Go ahead. I hope what?
No, go ahead. I hope I'm wrong about the future of it.
Yeah, I do too. But I unfortunately think you're probably right, because part of what is tricky about COVID is the fact that it is affecting a lot of people, but it isn't killing a lot of people. And so because there isn't a death toll that is rising as quickly as an illness toll, and because some people are carrying it and have it and don't even get sick at all, we've sort of found a way to sort of bypass it and not think about it. But what I get in listening to you and in the book that you wrote, Sugar Mountain, which is available on Amazon, by the way, and anywhere books are sold, what I get from you is that this has happened before, and that what we're going through is a precursor, perhaps, hopefully not, to something that can come in the future. And what you do you in your book, and pardon me for, I know you sent me a copy and I read a little bit of it, but I
That's all
wasn't able
right.
to
Yeah.
go through the whole of it. Were you able to prepare scenarios that people could follow for living in avoidance of this, or living to get around it? I know the homesteader movement is big in what you're talking about, of people isolating and living and living. And I know that movement was really big in 2013, where there were some militias, people were arming up, and people were worried about that, where we're protecting our land, we're protecting our environment. I guess the
Exactly.
I guess the question I want to ask is, there's so much talk politically about how China let this out of its country. Did they have any chance of keeping it within their country, as far as you can tell?
Well, I think when you start imprisoning doctors who are warning you, it tells me that they should have been open about it immediately and taken steps. Um, and I don't know. I There's lots of theories going around about where it started. Um, but there's something, and I do think I'm surprised the World Wildlife Fund and other people haven't really gone after the Chinese culture for their live markets. Those things are hideous, and they're
Yeah,
wiping out species all over the world. I, you know, but it's not just China. Apparently, there are high security biolabs now all over the world, and the question is, how rigorous are the safety precautions? Because they
yeah,
really are tinkering with things like COVID-19 in these places.
yeah,
And they're not just the developed world, but they're in the underdeveloped world too. And I think that is something the World Health Organization or the UN or somebody, I think, needs to start taking a really close look at not just in China, but in the United States and Netherlands, wherever they are. I because yeah, it could have been started in bats. I looked it up, by the way. I found a recipe for bat soup, but no, but I mean, it could have started there, but there's other possibilities as well.
yes,
Uh,
yeah.
I think that all needs to be
And
checked
I want to
out.
just I want to just caution people listening that Alfie is not a scientist. He's a writer. I'm not a scientist. We're conjecturing with things that he wrote about almost 10 years ago that are happening right now. And so
Right.
there's something to the vision of people who look at a situation and write a story about it and develop that story. And if the Mosaic podcast is really different than most podcasts. It's really not a vehicle to sell books or to do that type of thing. But I'm so intrigued by the coincidence of what you wrote and the reality of what is happening that I really want to stay on it a little bit. And yet,
Sure.
what I really wonder about is the Mosaic podcast is about pivot points. It's about pivots that could be made in the course of time that seem small initially, but that if you continue to go in the direction, a 2 millimeter shift when you're riding on a road is barely perceivable until you're 100 miles down the road, and then you're not in the same place that you would have been if you didn't make that shift. Do you see something pivotal happening right now that we could that that you would look at from your predictive fiction story of Sugar Mountain to the reality of what's happening now? Do you see a pivot point in front of us that we need to take a look at from your point of view?
Oh, I think there's a huge pivot point. I think there's several large pivot points. Um, but I don't think I'm equipped to do anything more than kind of speculate
Yeah,
on. Uh, now, when you have an echocardiogram, you may not have to go back into the doctor and sit in his office for 5 minutes while he tries to remember who you are and gives you the results of the test. Charges Medicare $350. Maybe now we can do it just like we're doing now. That might be one point.
Yeah.
It might open up education. People get used to learning this way. The whole world becomes a university. There's, I don't know. I mean, I think this is the kind of thing that somebody younger than I am, and maybe with a few more brain cells, ought to start thinking about, because I think you're right. I think this is a pivot point, not just one, but maybe more than one.
Yeah.
Well, go ahead. I'm finished.
Okay. When we look at the world and all the things that are happening, we look at institutions that are crumbling. We look at situations. We look at race relations, and we look at when I was growing up in the 60s and 70s, the same thing was being said, but now we're 40, 50 years later, and the same thing's being said again. I can only hope that this time it takes a little more hold, but it feels like it might take more hold this time. There was a Me Too movement in America that happened just a few years ago that almost has faded into the background, but it hasn't faded into the background. There's human rights are starting to take effect again. Maybe because it's in contrast to a president who's done amazing things in some way, but has almost, sort of fought the human rights movement by separating out people in the way in whatever for whatever reason he's done it. But it feels like Bucky Fuller said it a long time ago. He said, "You can't fix the problems of today with the thinking of today. You have to create a new paradigm that makes the old paradigm obsolete." It feels like we are in the moments of creating this new paradigm that will make this old paradigm obsolete. And I just wonder what your insights are. I'm not counting on you to be a rocket scientist. I'm counting on you to be someone who's lived a very rich, full life, who's seen a lot of different things, who's had the insight to be able to sit down and write about the things you've seen and to speak with education, because your background certainly affords you that liberty. What is it you see as we move forward?
I don't know. I'm an old-fashioned liberal. I believe in tolerance, and I think we have to be careful, frankly, that the shouting doesn't get so loud that nobody hears anybody.
Yeah.
And I think that's happening a bit. If you're going to be, I am hankering to be post-racial, and
Yes.
maybe even post-gender.
Post. What was it? I lost your last word.
Post-gender.
Post-gender.
I am, I take one person at a time.
Yeah.
And that's all I want to do. And if you start lumping people into categories, good or bad, it always turns out bad.
Yeah.
You can have tribalism can be creative, but it can also be very, very destructive. And I think that's just something we've got to watch. We have to come back and believe in some of the principles of free speech. Don't tell people you've got to let them talk, but they've got to let you talk.
Yeah.
That I think is a threat right now. People are just getting so extreme, and it's pretty soon you're going to have to close down the Boston Symphony because most of the composers were white male, and you're getting into that realm, and it's just, to me, it's getting inane.
Yes.
And it's like, wait a minute, you can have a jazz festival and Boston Symphony Orchestra. They're not mutually exclusive.
Absolutely.
Any mean.
Absolutely.
That's part of the mosaic of our life.
I love it. Thank you. Thank you. Can I share a story with you if you don't mind?
Not at all. Go for it. Yeah.
I've had the opportunity in my life to sit with some of the richest people in the world as friends, to sit at their dining room tables, to play in the living room with their children, um, and to share moments with them where they were kind enough to give me their counsel, and even kinder sometimes to ask my counsel on certain things. I've also been in the same room with some of the biggest spiritual leaders and some of the most inspirational people in exactly the same situations. And I've played with their children. I've met their families. I've sat around the table with them and shared meals together, and we've shared insights together. And I've also had the beautiful opportunity to sit on street corners with some of the poorest of the poor. And they've been kind enough to do exactly the same thing. We've shared a loaf of bread together and a bottle of wine. I've met their friends. Sometimes their family has come by. They've told me of
Yeah.
their life. They've given me counsel for my life, and occasionally asked counsel for them from me. And one of the things that I found is that every single person, no matter how rich or poor, no matter what color their skin, no matter what religion they practice, no matter what border they live behind, no matter who they follow politically, wants the same three things. They want to be loved and accepted. They want to be listened to and heard, and they want to be acknowledged and validated. And I realized that I could do that for people. I didn't need a college degree to do that. I didn't need to be an ordained minister of a church or rabbinical school. I didn't need to be the world's famous coach, all of which are in credentials of what I have. But none of those were valuable to this process. All that was valuable was a heart that was open to listen to people and hear what people were saying. Amongst
Absolutely.
amongst the people that have taught me the most has been my daughter. I have the blessing of having a 30-year-old developmentally delayed daughter. And
Okay.
Alfie, she can't have a conversation like this that you and I are having. And most people don't understand her when she speaks. But because I'm her dad and I'm the closest person, because we love each other so much, I understand
Sure.
more than most people when she speaks. But sometimes I don't. Sometimes she says things and I just can't understand them. And I notice when she says things and I can't understand them, she'll say them louder, thinking that maybe I haven't heard them. But it wasn't because of her volume, it was because of her clarity. I just couldn't understand the clarity of her message. When she would say it louder and she wasn't heard, she would start to tantrum. And that could be in the middle of a restaurant. It could be when we're at a friend's house. It could be driving in a car. It could be walking on the beach. It could be having a bath. It could be wherever and whenever it happened. Didn't follow in sequence. It could happen hours later. Or it could happen moments later. And when that didn't work, I found she came running at me and tried to rip my shirt or bite me because she was just that frustrated. Alfie, this went on for about 15 years. And I used to think that I was a pretty smart man who was sensitive to the needs of other people, but none of that touched any of it. It was after 15 years of this happening 3, 4, 5, sometimes 10 times a day, not every day, thank God,
Ooh,
but happening
yeah.
often, that in the midst of one of her rages, I said to her, Elisa, you know that I love you more than anything in this world. You know that I want to understand you more than anything in this world. I just can't understand your words. Would you be kind enough to please try and speak to me without words? Tell me what you're trying to say without using words. She had a smile on her face that melted her own rage and melted my heart. And suddenly she looked at me and she said, I am daddy. And I said, I'm sorry, what the heck are you talking about? You are daddy. How are you doing that? And she took her finger and she put it to the side of her head. And what I understood from that was that she was putting thoughts into my head. And Alfie, I thought that I had felt those thoughts in my head. I thought that sometimes I was hearing her, but I didn't trust that she could even have those thoughts. Because sometimes when someone doesn't speak, you think they can't think, even though they can think. They just can't say what they think.
Yes.
Right. And
Right.
and and so
Absolutely.
when I looked at her and I said, you little stinker, have you been putting thoughts into my head? And she started to laugh, that laughter that was dropping all of the weight of not being understood for all those years. fell off of her, and she just
Right.
became giddy. And her laughter was contagious, so that I started laughing, and my laughter then was contagious to her. And we laughed for about 15 minutes together, but it felt like
That's
6 years,
amazing.
right?
It's contagious.
It's contagious. It was just contagious, and it was
That's great.
beautiful.
That's marvelous.
And if it would have stopped there, that would have made my life worthwhile, because now I have a relationship with my daughter that I could never have before. But what I thought after a
Right.
moment is, I wonder, Alfie, if my daughter is different or the same as other people. And what I started to realize is, everybody I know acts in the same way. When they speak and they don't get heard, they yell. When they yell and they don't get heard, they try and create chaos. They try and disrupt create a disruption. And when they disrupt and it doesn't work, they try and destroy something. They could be shooting people
Right.
in a square. They could be infusing a virus into a group of people. They could be blowing up a building. They could be breaking up a marriage. They could be doing whatever they do.
Sure.
So I took that into boardrooms, into hospitals, into prisons, into schools, into medical centers, into every segment of society. And what I found is, there's a simple answer to to the problems that exist in the world, that my 30-year-old developmentally delayed daughter taught me. That if you retrofit it all back, you don't need to yell if you're listened to. You don't need to tantrum if someone hears you. You don't need to attack if somebody understands you. Nobody in 65 years of being alive has ever said to me, Danny, I want you to believe like I believe. Because when they feel loved and accepted and listened to and heard and acknowledged and validated, they know I have the right to believe what I believe.
Sure.
I wonder what your thoughts
Right.
are on all that.
Absolutely. I think I was privileged to know, as a fairly good friend, close friend, the late poet Seamus Heaney, won the Nobel Prize. He's a great poet. As I once said to somebody, I think he's an even greater man.
Yeah.
And what I learned from him, or tried to learn from him, was uh, what I would call the intensity of his listening. So
Yes.
here it is, probably one of the most articulate people of the 20th and 21st century, who I remember for what he said, because he could speak beautifully, he wrote beautiful poetry. What I remember him for is listening. And the way when people at a dinner table or something like that were talking, he would be forward like this. And I'm not that good. I also like to talk. Um, but I think it's taken me a long, long, long time to listen. And I think that's, in a sense, what happened with your daughter. But somewhere along the line, you listen with everything you have.
Yeah.
Uh, and that came through. I mean, that's what I feel. Um, and I'm 79 years old, and I'm still learning
Yeah.
how to listen. Uh,
Yeah.
and that, and again, it's not easy for me because I'm a natural, you know, and I like to think that I've got things to say.
Yes.
And, but, you know, and again, I don't think, uh, the thing about it is listening is not silence. Um, and
Yes.
I think listening can also be almost intimidating. Um, and so yeah, it's like everything in human life. It's but I think in terms of communicating, trying to just learn to listen to other people, but then also at some point saying, "Hey, I got something to say too,"
I love that.
and it. I think what you're doing on the street corner sometimes, and I try to do it without condescending, but um, I have a guy who fixes lawn equipment out in Western Mass because I do my own landscaping. Motorcycle accident about 20 years ago. And he can do so much, and he's in a wheelchair. And I think sometimes he thinks, I feel sorry for him. And I got to tell him, I admire him so much.
Yes.
I'm a victim. He just going in the world, And I think those are the kind of people you're talking about.
Yeah.
On the street corner, like, yes, there's some people, but there's so many that do have things to say.
Yeah.
What you're talking about, in a sense, is you're going to become a professional listener as you
Yes.
go through the mosaic.
Yeah.
And I wish I had the gift of listening more. Let me put it.
Me too. Me too, Alfie. I often look at God and say, for you to put this message into the world through somebody like me, you must be really in trouble, because I'm a talker, right? But I heard something.
We both are.
But I heard something really interesting, and it was in a voice within inside me that said it's okay for you to speak, because when you speak, you occupy the mind of another individual, and if you speak fluently enough, then the mind of the other person will engage. What that will do is allow their heart and soul to be able to communicate with you in a way that it wouldn't be able to communicate with you, because the mind gets scared of that happening. And so if the mind's occupied, it doesn't get scared of the transmission that's happening from heart to heart and soul to soul. And one of the ways, and I'm asking this in a long question to you, I'm sorry, but one of the things that happened for me in writing the mosaic, and I'm interested to know if this happens to you at all, is first of all, the characters spoke to me and they told me what they wanted to say. But second of all, what really was interesting is, to me, the story of the mosaic is fabulous. It's simple, it's charming, it's innocent, it's beautiful. But it isn't the story that moves people. I think it's the space between the words of the story that really help. And it's sort of exactly what we're talking about, that in the telling of the story, there's a space between the words of the speaking that we're doing that allows us to hear if a person's following with us, if a person's with us, if a person, what they're thinking, what they're feeling. Do you feel that when you write, that the space between the words is as valuable as the words themselves?
Probably not. Certainly not consciously.
Yeah.
I think I spend a lot of time. I know what I want to say, um, but I don't. But I want it said in a certain way, and I have to wait for it.
Yes.
So that would be, the that's my process. I do think, though, that closest I could get to that would be what I might call the pacing of words in a sentence. Of course, then you're starting to get into deliberate pacing, which is what you get in poetry. And not that you have to have a poem to have it poetic, but
Yeah.
I think in some sense the spacing has to do with the uh, incantation, if you will. Again, I haven't really thought this through. It was something I'd have to go
Interesting.
and have a gin and tonic and think it over.
Okay, maybe that's our next conversation, with a gin and tonic and a scotch or something. We sit together and just
Yeah, right.
talk it through. With the intention of your words, is there something that Sugar Mountain wants to say to the world today?
Well, I I think it says a lot of things. Put it that way. I think it you take people and you put them under pressure, and then they have to make decisions which are really tough. You take the little girl in who's come up the road, who may be contagious. What do you do with her? What do you do with a family that needs help that may be contagious? And at some point, somebody shows up with a bus full of kids. They have to turn them away. And so what it is just trying to, these moral dilemmas are not easy. They sometimes get, oh, you should have done this. The world doesn't work that way.
Yeah.
And we're not in that position now, but I think has been through history. Species has evolved. I like to think evolving in a good direction. I mean, it gets into those sorts of questions, moral dilemmas, and I
Yeah,
think
but we even had some of that with people on a cruise ship being infected and nobody wanting to let them come aboard. Right? You remember
there
that?
you go. But that's absolutely, but that's not an easy decision
It's not an
for the
easy
person,
decision.
the harbor master, who's responsible for all these
Yeah.
people. This is uh, this is again, and you're coming. I assume you're coming out of a tradition which has been talking about this stuff for 5,000 years.
Yes. Yes.
And it's the thing about it is, I think what to realize, it's not just the good guys and the bad guys. There are good guys and bad guys, but there's an awful lot in the middle, which is hues of gray and
Yeah.
sometimes turns purple. It, it's not, and I think the book in some ways gets into that a good deal, into that. You know, like they do get attacked by a family that's been marauding, and Cyrus Arkwright, who's a passive, got a son who's been an ex-ranger, and he said that we will not fire first, and and we will not give ourselves a license. And I think this is, when you go back, and particularly in the 20th century, as I'm the Nazis and the communists under Stalin gave themselves license to kill. This to me is what happens when you're an extremist. So that's one of the things that the book looks at, and
Yeah.
I like to think looks at it with a certain amount of clarity. But I'm not the reviewer.
I understand. For those of you who are listening, his name is Alfred Alcorn. His book is called Sugar
Right?
Mountain. It's available
Want me to hold it
everywhere.
up?
Yes, absolutely. Please. He's holding it up for you to see. It's Sugar Mountain. It's available on Amazon or wherever books are sold. It's an important book to read right now because it talks, as Alfie just said to us, it talks about those places where good people and bad people are not what we're talking about. We're talking about the gray people in between, where good people have to make hard decisions and sometimes can be considered bad, but nobody's really good or bad. We're in moral dilemmas right now, and if Sugar Mountain can
We
help
are.
us see at least the way some other people have looked at it. At least the story is that's predicted this is happening as a predictive of how we might act, and we might learn from some of the ways people act, or we might just enjoy reading the story of what might come to us, God forbid, down the line, and be able to prepare for it, whether that means you become a homesteader or you become something else. There are real issues that are around, and when someone as um, educated and has the brilliance of pen to paper that Alfie has, writes about it, I can't recommend to you highly enough. You pick up the book Sugar Mountain and you read it. It's a page turner and you'll want to read it. Alfie, I thank you so much for taking your time to come here and be with us today. It means a lot to me that you would do this. I wish you tremendous success in with Sugar Mountain and all the other. He's written 10 books total. So if you like Sugar Mountain, pick up all the other ones as well. It's always great to discover a great writer, and when you find that great writer, you want to read everything they've written. So don't stop at Sugar Mountain. Just keep going. Is there one last thing you
Danny,
want to
thank you
say?
so much. No, I just thank you for taking the time and the effort, and just good luck with Mosaic. I think it's a brilliant idea, and I think we need those points. We need those. Uh, we need the all the little things that go into the big picture. So, and, Mosaic brings it. I hope it brings it to life.
Yes, me too.
Mosaic means. Um, and anyway, thank you so much.
It's my honor.
And now I don't know how can I get copies of this?
I will
Of
send
your
it. I will send that to you. I just want to thank everybody for showing up. I want to thank you for listening. If you like this, I hope you'll review it on Apple Podcasts. I hope you'll share it with your friends. I hope you'll tell people about the book Sugar Mountain, and I hope that you will read it yourself and see what we're in store for, possibly or hopefully not, in the next rendition of what could be COVID 20 or whatever it's going to be called. But COVID-19 is hopefully it's just one incident, but it's more than likely a precursor to something more that's coming. And prepare for that. Read Sugar Mountain and get a sense of what might be happening. Again, Alfie, thank you. People who follow, thank you. Share this with your friends. Give a good rating, and we'll see you next time.
Danny.
Absolutely, Alfie.
Stay good.
We'll see you next time on the Mosaic Podcast. Ciao.
Stay safe. Ciao.
Thank you. You too.